Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is bloom. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we use this verb. The first way you're likely to hear the verb bloom used is to mean to produce flowers or to be in flower. So I think for this particular definition, it could help to have a couple pictures. So in the spring here, you're going to start to see this happen with plants, right? So you can see petals sort of starting to form on this flower. But eventually, right, they're going to open up. And that's what we mean by this verb, bloom. A second way you might hear the verb bloom used is to mean to mature into achievement or excellence. So sometimes we will describe children maturing and blooming into adulthood. A third way you might hear the verb bloom used is in reference to color and/or light. And it generally means the color or the light is becoming radiant or glowing. This particular usage probably isn't very common. I think you might encounter it more if you're reading literature, and writers might use this to kind of paint a really clear picture for you. You should know that bloom is a regular verb. To make the progressive tense, we're going to add ing to form blooming. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made by adding ed. The base verb bloom ends in this voiced N sound. So our ed ending is going to make a D sound. Bloomed, bloomed. You'll be happy to know that I don't have any additional phrasal verbs or different meanings for us to learn for this particular verb. And instead, that's going to allow us to focus on doing a little verb tense practice. Today, we're going to focus on making sentences in the past perfect and the simple future using will. Let's start with the past perfect. We're generally using this verb tense to describe an action that occurred before a certain point in time or before another action. To make this particular verb tense, we're going to use the past form of have, which is had, and then we'll use our participle, which in this case happens to be the same thing as the simple past tense. Let's look at an affirmative example. The flowers had bloomed before the week of freezing temperatures. And that's bad news for these flowers because likely has resulted, the freezing temperatures, I should say, has caused the flowers to probably die. Now, if I want to make a negative sentence, what I need to do is insert not after had. You may hear some people use the contraction hadn't, but as you speak and write, you don't have to do that by any means. Let's look at another example. The flowers hadn't bloomed before the end of the experiment. So someone might have been testing some different nutrients to go into soil to see how that affects, but the action of blooming did not occur before this experiment ended. Now, if you want to make a yes or no question in the past perfect, you can start with had, then we'll have our subject, and then the participle form of the verb. Here's another example. Had her career bloomed before finding a mentor? Now, this sentence is using the second definition of the verb. So looking for something to, in this case, kind of her profession, her career, to take off, to be successful. Now, let's make some sentences in the simple future using will. We tend to use will to talk about facts and make predictions. Sometimes it's used for quick decisions or for making an offer or promise. I think most of my examples here are going to come down to making predictions. The nice thing about using will to make simple future sentences is that we're going to have will and then our base verb, and that's it. No matter what our subject is, that structure doesn't change. So here is another example sentence. The cherry blossoms in Japan will bloom around March 15th. This is very much a prediction. If you've never looked at pictures of this before, or maybe never seen it in person, I think it can be quite breathtaking. I have not seen them in person. The pictures are just gorgeous of these trees that are in Japan. And based on temperatures, how long and cold our winters are, the time at which the trees start to bloom can be a little different. But this year they're predicting in just over a week that it will be the perfect time to see them. Now, if you want to make a negative simple future sentence using will, you'll insert not after will. And then again, we'll use the base verb right after that. You might hear some people use the contraction won't. Here's another example. This flower won't bloom for another 3 years. So there are some special flowers and plants that do not bloom every year. And it can be 3, 4, or more years between the point in which they will bloom. And if you want to make a yes or no question in the simple future, start with will, then place your subject, and then the base verb. And again, this is the structure no matter what your subject is. So here's a yes or no question. Will the tulips bloom in May? That can be a rather popular thing to see where I live in Iowa, but we never know what the weather will give us. So I'm not sure if I can say definitively yes they will or no they won't, but maybe. Now let's take a look at some words that are related to our verb bloom. And the first one we're going to take a look at is the noun form of this word. So exact same spelling, exact same pronunciation. When the noun bloom is used, it could be referring to flowers or a flowering state. So an example of this usage would be, are the daffodils in bloom? So the idea again, have they opened up? Now, if you're studying biology, you might encounter bloom. And the meaning here is connected to rapid growth of plankton, which might be a new word for you. I'm not a biologist, so I won't get too deep in it. But let's look at an example sentence and a picture that I have. So there's an algae bloom in the pond. Now, that might not make much sense to you. So I've got a picture, and what we should be looking at is sort of clear water in this area. But instead, I hope you see kind of this green growth on top of the water. That's algae. And this algae has rapidly grown, and it's covering all of the water. And that can be really damaging to fish. It probably is not a good idea for you to swim in this. That could make you sick or have other negative health impacts. The next word we're going to take a look at is bloomer. This is also a noun, and it can have a couple different meanings. It could be referring to a plant that produces flowers at some sort of specific time. Here's an example of that. These plants are night bloomers. So many people think of flowers in particular as opening up when there's sunlight, but there are different types of plants that might open up at night. A second meaning for bloomer is in reference to a person who matures at some specific time. An example of that would be she was an early bloomer. So you hear early, late, many times used to describe whether someone's maturing was sort of normal compared to their peers. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.